Go ahead and start the seminar. Welcome to the. So this is the 8th seminar in the series of faculty seminars which we conduct by the Department of Basic Science and Humanities. It is so that people can share ideas and basically interact with one another, within and outside of the department. So today's presenter is Dr. Sonia Paul, as you can see, and so just a brief description of her, which I'd like to give before she begins her seminar, is Miss Sonia Paul. She did her graduation in English from St. Teresa's College, Ernakulam, and did a postgraduate, which is an MA in English Language and Literature from the University of Kerala. After which she completed her M.Phil from Mother Teresa's Women's University, Kodaikanal. She's also completed her PhD from MG University in the year 2015. Outside of these, she has additionally done a postgraduate degree in religion and philosophy from Madurai Kamaraj University and a postgraduate diploma in higher education from Indira Gandhi Open University, Delhi. So today, her topic, as you can see on the screen, is going to be based on feminism. So without much further ado, we will start the seminar. So over to you, Sonia.
Thank you, Vinay. Good evening and welcome to this session of the DBSH Faculty Seminar Series, wherein we'll be looking at feminism and the practice of freedom. So let me just share my slides with you. I hope the slides are visible.
Yes, miss.
Okay, thank you. So let's get started. Now, when Vinay gave the introduction, he said that my topic involves feminism, but let me just give you a small warning right at the beginning. I'm not getting into anything controversial here. I'm just going to be talking about feminist approaches in education, which again is something which is only evolving, been evolving for quite a period of time. So that's what I'm going to be looking at. Okay, so I'm going to be starting by posing a question to you. What do you see on the slide? Now, I'm sure that almost all of you are familiar with what you're looking at. Your answer might be that you see an acorn. Okay, an acorn is a tiny nut. At least some of us might have really seen it, and a few others might have seen the pictures. But when you look at this acorn, what exactly do you see? If you pause to think further, you will know that you're looking at a tiny nut which holds within it the potential to be the mighty oak tree. So to use this metaphor of the acorn further, what do we see when we enter our classrooms? A group of 60 to 70 tiny nuts or 60 to 70 potential oak trees. As teachers, I would like to believe it would be the latter. We see 60 to 70 individuals with their own stories to tell, their own experiences to share, and most importantly, their own potential to realize. Feminist approaches in education evolved partly as a reaction to the banking model of education. I'm sure that you're familiar with this particular metaphor of banking model of education. The banking model of education is a metaphor developed by the Brazilian educator, Christian socialist, political activist, and scholar, Paulo Freire, wherein the students are seen as mere receptacles for the knowledge which is deposited in them by the teachers. Freire went on to suggest that in Western education, the teacher is a dictator and the student is a passive observer. And these statements from his seminal work capture this idea brilliantly. He says, knowledge is a gift bestowed by those who consider themselves knowledgeable upon those whom they consider to know nothing. The teacher presents himself to his students as their necessary opposite. By considering their ignorance absolute, he justifies his own existence. So let me draw your attention to the fact that we are following something which is similar to the banking model. Now, in the banking model, the teacher takes center stage. The teacher teaches, the teacher knows everything. The teacher thinks, narrates, disciplines, the teacher chooses, the teacher acts, the teacher sets the curriculum, the teacher claims authority, the teacher is the subject. So in this model, the student becomes the oppressed. Their prior knowledge is ignored. They are taught to be submissive to authority and comply to the demands of those in power. Passive learning, which stifles creativity and critical thinking, becomes the norm. What is more, the individual student is lost in the group. Their uniqueness and individuality is never acknowledged. Freire, of course, went on to suggest problem-posing education as a solution to this state of affairs. And he invited teachers to become co-learners with the students. Critiques of the existing model of education continue. The advantages and disadvantages of the banking model are discussed and debated, and new approaches continue to find a place in academics, among which one happens to be the feminist approach. What do we mean by the feminist approach? So sometimes it helps to begin with what something is not and then move on to what it is. So I'm going to choose that particular approach here. See, feminist approach or a feminist pedagogy is not a toolbox. It is not a collection of strategies, not something you can just go and implement in your classroom. We can't give you something like that. Rather, it is a philosophy of teaching and learning that integrates feminist values. For example, values such as equality, diversity, dignity, justice, respect, and so on, with theories and research on teaching and learning. It is thus a line of thought that evolved to challenge the banking model, drawing sustenance from the feminist movement. It falls back on the research-validated fact that the teacher's intentions in teaching, that is, why a strategy is adopted, has a greater impact on student learning than the strategies in themselves. The teacher's beliefs and values about teaching, learning, and creation of knowledge matter. And the student and the teacher in this approach are learning with and from one another and are co-creators of knowledge. Let us now examine the core tenets of the feminist approach. Now, feminist pedagogy is used in different ways and for different purposes across disciplines and academic settings. However, the tenets remain the same, namely, resisting hierarchy, using experience as a resource, and transformative learning. So let's take a look at what we mean by resisting hierarchy. The feminist approach upends the traditional classroom hierarchy, and the students and the teacher work together to deliver content and influence the design of the class. Using experience as a resource means, along with books and other resources, the experiences of the students and the teachers are used as learning materials. This is the advantage of bringing into the discussion related experiences which might not have been documented so far. And transformative learning points to be the aim of this approach, which goes beyond mere acquiring of knowledge, but a shift in the thinking process. By bringing their own experiences into the classroom, students learn how to reinterpret and validate their experiences in new and critical light. So, what would we see in a classroom wherein the feminist approach is implemented? One, knowledge co-creation. So as we have seen in the previous slides, in a feminist approach, knowledge is co-created by the learners and the teachers. Two, community. The classroom is a closely knit community within which both individual autonomy and mutual support flourish. Three, empowerment. learners are empowered to make choices, and emphasis is given to developing efficacy and confidence. 4, voice. Voices are heard and experiences valued. Hitherto marginalized works and contributions which have never been brought into the curriculum are brought into the discussion. And most importantly, dialogue, not lecture, becomes the mode of communication. And 5, reflection. The teacher and the learner engage in critical self-reflection, examining their biases and assumptions, and receive and act on feedback from one another. So one simple practice which I came across in the course of my reading on feminist approaches is involving our students in framing our course objectives. See, many of us in our classes, especially in the first day, would be asking our class what they expect from a particular course. What do you expect from this class? And we use it as an icebreaker activity just to generate some responses and get them talking. But in the feminist approach, they suggest that you can carry this further. You can analyze and categorize the responses that you're getting from your students. And of course, falling back upon Bloom's taxonomy and such frameworks, you could come up with your course objectives, which the students will naturally own up because they have contributed to it. So you can ensure there is commitment and participation. It's a very simple thing to do, but at the same time, it gives, as we have seen, a little bit of involvement for the students in the course that is being taught. Now, if there is something that is being done and it is visible, then it's bound to have critics in plenty. So this approach too is not without its detractors. There are people who hold that systemic inequity does not exist in education. And so there is no reason to bring in something like a feminist approach at all. And there are those who claim that feminist pedagogy is an epistemological absurdity. Something like this does not really exist. It doesn't make sense. And the core tenets themselves are prone to criticism. So the tenets that we just now saw, if you want to be really critical about them, you'd see that there are unanswered questions with regard to this. See, for instance, resisting hierarchy. It is very easy to say that we should try to break down this hierarchy. But when the teacher is paid to assess the students, how can there be equality? Because it's a relationship between an assessor and an assessee. And the teacher is naturally going to be holding some kind of authority there. So how do we resist a hierarchy here? Secondly, the point of using experience as a resource. And here too, who is able to speak out in a classroom? How can personal experiences be shared in a professional teacher-student relationship? And how much of emotions can we handle in a class? When you come to transformative learning, what changes in thinking can occur within an institutionalized learning environment? That is a very important criticism. And I think it applies to almost all pedagogies, but not just to feminists. Now, however, criticism has never weakened feminists. It has only fueled them on. And as I said at the beginning, feminist approaches are gaining ground. Now, in the pandemic, I specifically chose this topic because I was reading about something connecting the pandemic and feminist approaches in the classroom. Is this approach more relevant in times like these? At least I agree. In fact, in trying times such as the ones we are living through, honoring experiences are found to have an affirmative effect on the classroom participants. The pandemic-induced new normal necessitated that teachers learn to use online tools and become more tech-savvy, while students are by and large left to manage on their own with varying levels of support for online education. All of us, students and teachers alike, have also witnessed a lot of other changes in our lives, including maybe coping with loss. And most of these changes have different implications for different people based on their gender, financial status, support networks, and other distinctions. And to some extent, the impact this has had on women is definitely something different from what it might have been for men. So it helps to remember that the point made by feminists that we bring our lives with us into the classroom has suddenly become truer than ever. It is imperative to make connections between the course content and our personal experiences to realize that our circumstances influence our ability to teach and learn. By embracing a feminist approach, we could, to some extent, mitigate the isolation we often experience in the online classroom. So how does the feminist approach become the practice of freedom? Now, the feminist approach is but one of the many which can be adapted in our classrooms so that instead of instilling blind subservience and obedience to authority, we give our students the practice of freedom. And this will come easiest to those who, in the words of the academician and feminist bell hooks, I quote, believe that our work is not merely to share information, but to share in the intellectual and spiritual growth of our students. To teach in a manner that respects and cares for the souls of our students is essential if we are to provide the necessary conditions where learning can most deeply and intimately begin. So how does this feminist approach offer such a practice of freedom? See, feminist approach focuses on equality and provides an opportunity for students to contribute their unique experiences in a safe and free environment wherein they will be listened to and valued. So by engaging in open discussions, they learn to articulate their perspectives and their deepest convictions and develop confidence. Through the practice of respect, tolerance, and critical thinking, positive relationships are crafted. So here they are not called upon to conform, but to contribute to the new world order that is emerging. So by engaging their individuality, we liberate them to be who they are meant to be. So this is the idea behind the practice of freedom. Now, the practice of freedom is a phrase that I've taken from the work Teaching to Transgress by bell hooks. So to conclude, let us keep in mind that the mighty oak was once a little nut that stood its ground. You and I are privileged to be teachers who can identify, awaken, and nurture the latent potential in our students. May we be successful in helping the acorn stand its ground and become the mighty oak tree. That happens to be my prayer. And since I began with the acorn nut, I will wind up the session with peanuts. Just food for thought. Thank you. I'll take questions if there are any.
Okay, at this point, if anyone has any questions, you can just unmute yourself and ask. So well, if they are thinking of questions, ma'am, I had a question on this.
Yes, Vinay.
So it's you're talking about how basically we are changing the process of education, which again, while that is like, very much doable because, we are in that position, but isn't the system still framed in a sort of like a capitalist framework where everything needs to be like how you had said, in a very dictatorial discipline-based sort of education. So wouldn't like that doesn't this approach go against that, and wouldn't that be like overpowering over this sort of an approach?
Okay, Vinay, thank you for that question. But see, the very term feminist suggests that we will have to do a little bit of things which are different and controversial. So yes, this approach definitely is going against the system. In fact, it, as I told you, arose as a direct response to that system. And if you seriously believe that, yes, there is some kind of a system which is oppressive and which is dictatorial, and it is not doing our students any good, then I believe that as teachers, it is our responsibility to actually do something about it. If the system is oppressing our students, it is not giving them the freedom to be, then it's definitely our responsibility to make the necessary changes. So I suggest we start thinking about it seriously. Definitely, Vinay, we will have to go against the system, the established system or the conventions, but that is what will lead to change and growth. So yes, if you're asking me whether I have figured out how to go about and do it, no. I'm still thinking about it, but I believe through little practices, we can definitely do that, especially right now when we have got autonomy as an institution. I'm sure that we can make a few changes.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So before I go to the next question, which is a nice segue from what you just mentioned, I just want to remind all the participants, the feedback form for this session is now given in chat by Deepthi Miss. So in continuation of what you just said, Matthew sir has asked this question, which is, could you please suggest a few small practices we could adopt in the classroom to start to implement this approach? So basically the practical implementation.
Okay, thank you, Matthew, sir. This is one question that I definitely anticipated. But I can tell you that, see, it is not possible for any one of us to suggest practices. As I said, one thing which I felt was good in the course of my reading is where you engage the students and draw their responses to frame our course objectives. Because when we do these things, it has to be done consciously. We can't just take a strategy and apply it. We have to think about why we are doing it and what we plan to actually achieve by doing it. Nowadays, I find that many people put a lot of focus or thrust on strategies or practices. But what are these practices for? What is our intention behind them? That is the most important thing. And that's what the feminist approach actually talks about. So if you're willing to give the students in your class a voice as to maybe with regard to how to carry out the particular course, or maybe designing their assignments, or maybe even with regard to what is being taught, it could all be small steps that add up to giving them their own individuality. And in that way, that would be definitely aiding a feminist approach. But we don't have to call it a feminist approach at all. Still, if I come across anything more, sir, I'm reading upon this quite a lot nowadays. If I come across anything which is more than this, I'll definitely send it to you, sir. Any more questions?
Yes, ma'am. I think rather than a question, this was a very fresh topic because for me, I haven't read more about feminism and all, but I just want to make sure whether I understood that topic well. So I believe that the feminist approach that you were talking about, is it like you're giving a space for the students where they can explore, they can find out an idea which is not biased, which is straight from their heart, which is actually giving them a chance to think, a chance to assess, from what they have learned. So it's like learning and unlearning things in a platform where they have the kind of freedom. So they are actually creating via feminist approach to the teaching, field or academic field. You're trying to give or trying to cultivate a platform where student can interact freely. I hope I have understood it right. I mean, I felt like, you're actually pointing out towards such a kind of notion.
Yes, Teresa, definitely. Because see, what we do in the classroom is we come with a ready-made syllabus. We thrust it on our students. And oh yes, we do engage them once in a while in a small discussion. But more than that, how much involved are they in what we are teaching them? So there, you have to actually put it on them. They have to actually tell us how exactly the subject is going to be explored, how it is going to affect their lives. They have to start thinking about it. That is, they own it up rather than we thrusting it on them. So you have understood it correctly.
And one more doubt, then why is it called as like feminist approach? I mean, just because I haven't read about it. I mean, every time when a normal person hear about the word feminism, it's always striking on our head like there's something talking about gender, right? Something that women, obviously when we read related to feminism, we get an idea like women doesn't have a lot of right. They are not utilizing it. They are not making use of the opportunity. So they're talking about equality, right? So is it that is it pointing towards that aspect also?
Well, when you talk about feminist approaches in education, we are not just talking about the gender, we are talking about all kinds of oppression. It can be racial, it can be ethnic, it can be any kind of oppression that we are talking about here. And if you're looking at the traditional classroom situation and education system as such, there is a very strong patriarchal approach. Whether we want to acknowledge it or not, there's definitely that. Now, there is no reason to think that feminism is only about women and getting, or say, clamoring for their rights, fighting for equality or something like that. But yes, it is demanding equality for everyone. Right now, we are not just talking about men and women, we are talking about a lot of other genders as well. So this is something that cuts across all such distinctions. We are not just talking about women when we refer to feminist approach. We are talking about an approach that supports the individual and ensures there is equality and a voice for all in the classroom.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, Saridham is so far the person who's been asking the most amount of doubts in the Q&A session. So thank you, Saridham. And I think we are done with doubts. Let me just check. No, so there's no further questions in the chat. So I think we can wrap this up if there are no further questions. Once again, would like to remind you all that the feedback form the link to the feedback form has been given in the chat. So please do go ahead and fill that. The next seminar we'll be having will be done by Dr. Ragin Ramdas, and it will take place the last Saturday, like our usual time. This is the last Saturday of next month. So that's June 26th. Okay, so I hope to see you all during that time. And once again, thank you, Sonia ma'am, for this session.
Thank you.